All righty. Hey there, everyone. Sarah Brown-Westling here with Teacher to Teacher for Ask Sarah Live. First of all, we want to say just a thank you for hanging in there with us. We were getting your texts and your tweets, and we know you were there anxiously awaiting the insight of these three amazing educators. But I'll tell you what, we are here now, and we're excited that we're able to record this conversation and share it with you. For those of you who have not been on one of the Ask Sarah Lives before, I just want to let you know that one of the things that we really love about this is the time to talk to each other. So even though this is a recorded conversation, go ahead in the comments, introduce yourself, share some of your insight, your wisdom, because other folks are going to read this. So go ahead and add to the collective conversation. That's really, really important to us. And of course, if you have questions, go ahead and pose some of those questions in there, and we will try to get to as many as we can over the next several days, all right? So with that, I just want to get us started here this afternoon. And by thinking about actually a conversation I had yesterday with a friend of mine who also is an educator, and he said something that just really struck me. He said, you know, it is just so weird when you are in the business of people and your people are not with you all the time. And that's really what this has felt like to me. I don't know if it's felt like that to you as well, but that's part of the weirdness. But I have to say, this time in this space here in Ask Sarah Live is always a nice little respite for me. And it really is today, because these are three of my people, and I am so excited that you're going to get to learn from them today. So go ahead and say hello, everybody. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves here in just a second. Kareem, do you want to go ahead and get started? Say hey to everybody.
Hi, my name is Kareem Neal. I am a self-contained special education teacher in Phoenix, Arizona. I teach at Maryville High School. This is my 23rd year teaching, and I was the 2019 Arizona Teacher of the Year.
Awesome, thank you. And Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kellie May, and I'm a teacher on special assignment in Salt Lake City School District. And before that, I was mostly a secondary teacher in middle school and high school. And I have a son that is 13 and in 7th grade at Hillcrest Junior High in Murray School District, and he has Down syndrome. So I have both the teacher and parent perspective.
Which is just a really wonderful, I think, you know, rich part to this conversation. Thanks. Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Gross. I'm a teacher on special assignment in special education at Poway Unified School District in San Diego, California. And prior to that position, I was at the high school level supporting students with significant autism and at both a self-contained classroom and also including them in general education classrooms. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation today.
Yeah, well, we're so glad to have all of you here. You know, one of the things that is really important to me in this conversation is that we don't think that this is a conversation about special ed teachers for special ed teachers, right? This is a conversation for all educators, because this is about the work that we all have to do collectively and together to support all of our students, right? So it's about our special education teachers, our gen ed teachers, our para educators, our administrators, and really how we all work together to make sure we're meeting the needs of all of those students. You know, my own special ed students have taught me so much, and my colleagues also. And one of the things my students taught me a long time ago when I was, you know, early in this career was the difference between low expectations and long expectations. I learned, especially from a student, his name was John. He really taught me to never lower my expectations, but to lengthen them. And I've just really held on to the difference between those two. That, you know, it's sometimes looking at the length of time a student needs to get to their best self, right? To get to the places that they need to be. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with kind of our first question. So we're kind of thinking about the teaching realities that special ed teachers especially are facing right now. So I'm just gonna throw this out to the three of you, but I think that teachers are really concerned about being able to meet the needs of special ed students. So what advice, either as teachers or parents, do you have for concerned teachers and educators out there right now? I mean, we're hearing a lot about IEPs and 504s and expectations and all of those things. So I'm just really curious to hear what you all think about that. Kellie, what's your perspective on all of this?
I think that, I guess what I'd want to share with teachers, regular ed teachers, special education teachers, and parents is that we are truly all in this together. That there's worry that we're not doing this right. As a parent, am I doing this right? Am I doing enough? As a regular ed teacher, am I meeting the needs of my students? As a special ed teacher, am I, there's a lot of differentiation there as well. So there isn't a blueprint for this. And I think that it's important to cut ourselves some slack, but to reach out to our resources and know that if we keep at it, even if we make changes, that's okay. I know that with, in Parker's case, we are on, I think, like the third iteration. Each week there's a little tweak or a change because they've found a way that didn't work and then found a different way that works better. Same with the speech pathologist. We're trying something a little different this week. They're not drastic, huge changes, but they're always little improvements. And I think it's both from communication, from parent to teachers, like this isn't quite working or this might work better, as well as regular ed and special ed teachers communicating with each other. Yeah. And being willing to, know that we all don't know and we're all going to figure it out together.
Wonderful. So one of the questions that I think teachers might have, you mentioned like changes. So I've also heard from some parents that like the amount of change is feeling really overwhelming at home. So from your perspective, is there like a threshold for the amount of change that's okay? I heard you say like little improvements. Does that feel different to you than like changing the plan?
Yes, I feel like they shouldn't be like hugely
like stay on the same platform.
Change, right. Maybe stay on the same platform, or if early on, I know they did switch the platform once, but then after that, they just found that it was going to work better and it was similar to what was being used before. And I think that if you be sure to explain to parents why, or the teachers that you're working with, why it's better, because it is overwhelming, and change for the sake of change obviously doesn't go over very well. But if you're saying for this specific reason, this program works better, then the buy-in is there, and then hopefully the consistency will be there. But it's new for everyone, so.
Absolutely. That goes back to what both Megan and Kareem have already said, though, about those relationships, and in a lot of ways about slowing down in order to have really good communication, because it takes longer to explain why. Right? It's a little bit easier just to say we're going to change, and here is the change. But that why is so important, and we know that from our classrooms. When we tell our students why, it makes such a big difference. And maybe we just need to hang on to that as we're thinking about communicating with our parents as well. So I kind of want to build on this idea of relationships and partnerships, but also think a little bit about what that means for like the partnerships with the teaching teams, right? Or the partnerships with the teams at school. So I'm really curious about how you think teachers can use this time to not only cultivate relationships with the families, but also with the teams within the school, and why that might be important.
Okay, so one of the things I did first was think about how I was going to make sure all their therapy was happening, right? So we talked about changes and things like that, but there's no change to an IEP. Like that still needed to be followed. So it was like, okay, what kinds of things do we need to make sure that happens? And so me and all the therapists talked first and then kind of sent a uniform message to the parents to make sure that happens. So we just took a little bit of time, kind of like, making sure if you do, you take the time up front, when you get to the parents, then we're able to answer all the questions and do all the things. And I talked a lot with a paraprofessional in my classroom, and I wound up talking to, when I talked to her, I realized there was a lot that she could do with students still.
Yeah.
So I actually talked to administration at my school, and they actually gave her a laptop, like one of the teacher laptops,
Right.
that she can work with the students also. And then me and her sat down and went through stuff before, instruction. And it was kind of like, all right, we are not rushing this thing. We're just going to get it right. Because I know that when me and her come together, we can do the individual sessions that my students need it individually.
Right.
Like teaching them as a group right now online isn't the best way, right?
Right.
But as me and her being able to do individual sessions, we can get to, most students multiple times a week, if not daily, for an individual session. And so it was like, just keeping everybody in the loop, saying, all right, this is the process, this is how it's happening, this is how, this is how it's going on our end, parents. We're going to get there, and we're going to get there with a really solid plan, and it's going to work out really well. In the meantime, what kinds of questions do you have? What kinds of concerns are happening at home and things like that?
So I'm also hearing you're kind of like streamlining some of that communication.
We are, because one of the things I realized based on the way I was being communicated with, that it was just too much. Like I was getting, and I think all teachers probably got, probably upwards of 50 emails a day from different agencies, their own school, and even outside of that, right? Cable companies and all that.
And then anybody who's ever had your email address.
Anybody who's ever had your email, that you need to know their COVID plan, the whole 9 yards. And so knowing that, it was like, oh, I don't want my parents who, my students often have 8 people that they work with. I didn't contacted by 8 different people several times a day.
Yep.
And so we worked it out much better than that. So
yeah.
And it went seamlessly.
So Megan, I'm really curious about how you are approaching this, especially in your role as teacher on special assignment, because I think part of this is something that a lot of gen ed teachers are also struggling with. They don't know how to collaborate in a way that's meaningful and not overwhelming.
So I've been trying to reach out to the teacher teams that I support, and really trying to be mindful, like Kareem said, of like in the beginning, we're inundated with messages. And so whether it's texting people, I try to send like a weekly email, hoping that like I'll catch another person, that someone else will raise their hand and say, yes, support me. And I think just really kind of reframing that support, like we're all in essence first year teachers again.
Yes.
And so being able to be vulnerable with each other, I shared a resource with a science team and said, hey, maybe this would be helpful. And they said, yeah, if it was in a different format, can you do that? And I was like, oh, I could do that. Like, right. And then as a, as
needed, isn't it?
Right. It feels so good to have purpose, like so good. Yeah. And so I think like my advice right now to especially general education teachers, but everybody in the building, right? Like it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to say, I still don't know how to right click, right? Like I need some help.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kellie, what about from your perspective?
Well, I think that especially in secondary education, there's a lot of silos and separation. And so in that respect, it's not too different for the special education regular ed relationship or non-relationship, I guess. But I wouldn't let that deter you from reaching out to the people on your staff that can support you in those ways, and ask for support, and vice versa. The special ed teachers that are on staff in secondary institutions, reach out and say, hey, I'm here and I can offer this, or if anything, you may have ready-made things that you can offer, just like what Megan said, here's something for you to try, here's something for you to look at. and kind of putting it out there. It's kind of a different way to build relationships and build trust at this distance, but it's necessary for the success of our students and to support our students. So I think that it's going to present some opportunities for us to collaborate differently, especially for those schools that are out for the rest of the year. It's an opportunity to get to know each other and get some resources and support.
I love that. And I love the way that you're getting us to think about the whole big picture. I think that's really, really important. So I want to jump to a question that was actually posed on the Facebook page, on the Teacher to Teacher Facebook page. So April C. is a paraeducator, and she is wondering how she might work to support students and teachers during this time. She says she finds it hard to stay connected to students, kind of in that one-on-one space, since she's the para and not the classroom teacher or the special education teacher. What advice do you have for April?
So you got it, Megan. You got it.
I'll jump in at once. Megan, go ahead.
I think emailing the classroom teachers and asking to participate in their video calls. Yeah. We've asked in our district that general education teachers add their paraeducators onto whether they're using Google Classroom or Canvas or Schoology, adding them to that page.
That's another great, really concrete tip. Yeah.
Right. So that's like my first go-to start.
Absolutely.
I would emphasize that as well. And they do a Zoom once a week and a half, and it's their classmates and the paras and the teacher. And just as the paras are popping up, the excitement that my son has, and he's naming them and seeing them, and then they also can feel the value of what they bring to the classroom. Plus, in his school district, he can have 2 one-hour sessions. He can sign up with a para, and it can be in pairs or with other students. If they want to do a group, they can do that a couple times a week, and that helps them stay connected and gives everybody the right amount of support and connection, I think.
Absolutely. I love that. In fact, I saw one of your Facebook posts about your son and how excited he was, and how neat it was for you to watch him be so excited.
Yes.
Connected. Yeah, absolutely. Kareem?
Well, my parents and I mean, we talk every day for maybe the first couple of weeks. There's still one that I talk to every day. And so what I did was I said, oh, you know what, this would be a really cool time for y'all to kind of learn the deeper parts of the instruction. Because a lot of times in class, what happens is I jump up to the board with a lesson and, are around the table with some students, and then we go and they just kind of fight, And so I actually have gone through our curriculum program and how the lessons are formatted, and they can do all the lessons because they've been delivering them. They haven't been standing at the front of the board So I wound up getting a computer from school so that she's also able to give lessons. So I essentially run through the lessons with her, and then she is having individual sessions with students also. And then we do the weekly video meeting with all students and all ours also. And then all of us post on that Class Dojo format that I talked about earlier.
That's awesome.
Super involved. We're kind of like a big unit. I've been with the one parent that I talked about, the one who just got the computer today, actually, 8 years, and then the other 2 for over a year. So we were kind of a pretty solid unit, and it was a relatively seamless transition.
That's wonderful. And I hear you saying again, what you said at the beginning of the conversation about using this time in ways that we wouldn't necessarily be able to, right? So being able to have those conversations with the people in your classroom, on these deeper levels, in that sense, it's a gift, right? Yeah. So one more question from the Facebook page that I'd love for us to try to tackle. Jennifer says that the biggest issue she's having is knowing when students are getting it because she can't count on the same nonverbal cues to check for understanding. I think this is a really insightful question. What do you all think? What would you say to Jennifer? Yeah, Kareem?
I think I'd be no, I think I wouldn't be the best because I'm only doing one-on-one sessions. I'm not doing.
So you're still finding ways to get the nonverbal cues.
Exactly. So it's just me
okay.
and the student, and a lot of times the parent too. So some of the students who have higher needs, their parents are with them. So we're there.
Yeah. Yeah. Megan or Kelly, either of you with thoughts on this one?
One of the things that actually my son's teachers have done is they've sent really short Google surveys to really kind of get a sense of, are you getting it? How are you following along?
Yep.
And they're also able to incorporate some social emotional questions, checking in on, are you picking up lunches? And so I think we're worried about kids getting it. And I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace in that. Yeah. And I've been really enjoying the posts that's been going around social media about like, what if they actually do learn right now?
Yeah.
And what if this time isn't as catastrophic as it feels?
As we think, yes.
And so I think like keeping that with you as well, that right now we can just do the best we can do. And I think as a special education teacher, sometimes we don't see the thing that sticks until a couple of years later.
That's true.
Like 3 years later.
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, people were paying attention. This is fantastic.
Absolutely. And I even think, for myself, when I think about this question, for me, it's kind of the difference between like more frequent check-ins, like really delving into formatively assessing students, rather than relying on one big assignment every once in a while to be the barometer. And that's not necessarily any different than, like a classroom environment pre-pandemic. But I think it might be just as important, if not more important right now, to kind of consider the difference between what are the ways, and to ask ourselves, what are the ways that we can check in on teachers? Certainly we've talked about this before on Ask Sarah Live, but the use of office hours. So students, can sign up for, teachers are available at a scheduled time. So students who are having questions or if they're experiencing difficulty, they're able to know when to contact the teacher. So I think just being, again, present, we talked about that at the beginning of this conversation, but just being able to be present and available can also be a really great tool.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, I don't know what types of technology people have available or what they can then get their hands on. And so what's interesting is Parker has speech therapy, and you think speech therapy, you're speaking, but a lot of it is questions and answers where we figured out, our laptop is a touch screen, and she set up her end of things so that when she flips up 2 pictures and asks a question, he can touch and she can see. He'll try to approximate the word, but then he'll also touch for her to be able to see that. So things like switches and some of that technology may be available as in your classroom to be able to take to parents, and some you may need to acquire or try to get. And different people are doing different things, but supplying parents possibly with some of the technology they need, upping that for nonverbal students. Talking to your tech teams or your the speech tech teams on getting some ideas that way.
Absolutely. And I think for those teachers out there who are hearing, some of the technology that we've been talking about and are, really wishing that those things were available to them, I think we have to remember what Megan said, that this is also a time to, extend some grace to ourselves and to think about the ways that we can reach out and the ways that we can. Yeah. And that's okay too. So I kind of have one last question here for us. I'm curious about what you all think that we can learn from this time that we should take with us in the fall or whenever we go back to our classrooms. What do you think are some of the lessons? And maybe especially certainly, when we think about serving our special ed population, but there might be bigger lessons as well.
Mine would be form better relationships. I don't think that we don't want to. I just know that we get pretty busy as teachers.
Yeah.
And I talk about it a lot when I talk about like restorative practices and things like that. Like, oh, get time to know your students. And I really have this great family in my classroom, but the connection with the parents wasn't quite as solid, So building that kind of relationship, it will make all the difference going forward. I can imagine like how IEP meetings will go. I mean, we won't have to even bother with like introductions at the meeting and those things. And like, oh, that thing we were doing, of course we know we're doing it at home too. And it's really, I feel like it's like, all right, it'll be worth that time. It'll be worth that time. It'll be after school in the beginning and things like that, but it'll be worth it in the end.
I love that. Thank you. Megan or Kellie?
I think really the thing I've noticed a lot is really that we have access issues all the time.
Right.
And this really kind of brings them to light for everybody. So I'm really hoping that as teachers, we come back into our buildings really thinking about universal design for learning and how we're designing relevant, engaging instruction that kids can participate in multiple ways, and really honoring what's happening at home and family culture. Like I'm somebody who has raised her hand and said, I need a low tech option, even though I have technology, because trying to get a 5-year-old on a laptop is not something I want to do with my time. I don't want to teach her to right click. But I really do hope that we start thinking about really what is equitable education for all kids, because the things that we're seeing for our students with disabilities are not new. And I think it's really exciting that we're really focused on this, and that we really are dedicated to finding a way to providing a free and appropriate public education. So I think that's really powerful, and I hope that we continue that conversation instead of delegating it back out to specialists.
Absolutely. I always think that just kind of like in life, that really great things and really bad things just illuminate what's already there.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's happening for us right now, right? Like it's illuminating the really great stuff that's already there. And it's also illuminating the things we got to take a really hard look at, and we got to ask ourselves some really tough questions about. Yeah. Kellie, any thoughts?
Well, same thing. The cracks in the system, unintentional in a lot of ways, what you said about being busy, are there and magnified. And our students need us to need each other. And we need to collaborate better for our students in lots of ways. And all of us having the phenomenal experience of being state teachers of the year as a collective, knowing that capacity building and putting an idea out there. I may not know how to do this, but this is what I want to do. And then you get this resonation of, here's how you do it. I can help you out. Here are some ideas that exist in our school buildings everywhere.
Right.
And we have to stop being too busy to collaborate. It's kind of that front end thing also that Kareem mentioned. It's putting the work in the front. I mean, where are you going to put it?
Yeah.
Are you going to be reactive or proactive, preventive? And so hopefully this need that it seems so strong right now for support, and what do we do for our special education students, especially those regular ed teachers, will persist and drive them to build those important relationships and to share the information back and forth to really provide quality education and access to education that is true, with their peers. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is the beauty of these conversations. You know, I think you could hear that this was going to be a conversation about special ed and supporting students with IEPs, and people might think, well, this is going to be about filling out forms, you know, and things like that. And, you know, that's not what this conversation was about, right? This conversation is about people. And this conversation is about the relationships that we have. And the three of you just, kind of like underscored that over and over and over again. And I just, I think that's so valuable. I'm also really excited because this particular Ask Sarah Live is going to kick off for Teacher to Teacher, a Facebook group and kind of continued resources for teachers who are trying to make sense of how to create this equitable educational experience for all of our learners. So there is a Facebook page, or Facebook group rather. It's called SPED and Remote Learning Educators Connect. We'll make sure to get that name in one of the comments for all of you out there. But this is not the end of a conversation. This is the beginning of one. This is the beginning of a much larger one. A lot of people have said, I'm sure I've said it myself, like that I feel like I'm in the middle of a movie. Like the last month, I felt like I'm in the middle of some really strange movie, which has actually made me think a little bit about movies. I'm kind of like a film buff and I love them, but there's a difference between actually how feature films are made, and then how documentaries are made. So feature films, they write a script and they follow it the best they can. They cast the best people they can and they follow it, which is wonderful. But I think I hope that I'm actually not in a feature film. I hope I'm in a documentary, because documentarians actually go about their work really, really differently. They kind of record, hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage of things, and then they look at everything that they have, and then they decide what the actual story is. And if I could be one of those two kinds of teachers right now, I think I'd choose to be the documentarian, right? The one who right now is collecting all of the footage, and then I'm going to be able to look at it and figure out what kind of story I want to tell. And that actually reminds me, one of my favorite documentarians is Ken Burns. And I listened to this podcast that he did, an interview this fall. And I just wanted to leave all of us with this quote. He said, this is like some of his advice for living. And this sounds like advice for living and advice for teaching. He says, go, get out into the world, see, look around you, do, make something, relate, have an exchange with someone, be, take it in. So I have been taking in this wonderful conversation with the three of you. I can't thank you enough for your time and your wisdom. And I know that this is going to make such a difference to so many teachers out there. So thank you so much, everyone. Sure appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to all of you folks out there, just a reminder, add your insights, your questions into those comments, and check out that Facebook group, and we will be back with you next week for more Ask Sarah Live. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.